few little spikes, and the first one was probably the legless lizard video, just because it was such a weird animal. I think people found it interesting, and then it took off. But our biggest videos are definitely the egg-laying videos and the hatching videos, where we cut open the eggs a little to peek inside. I think people like that.
That is Emily of the YouTube channel Snake Discovery. I'm sure you recognize her voice. This is a channel that has blown up over the past year or so. I really enjoyed this conversation with Emily. We discuss how their channel got so big. I list off some really mind-blowing statistics about how fast their channel has grown, especially over the last 6 to 8 months or so. We talk about where she started with animals, what her business looks like, and she also let us in on what the future plans for Snake Discovery are and the vision that her and her husband Ed have for the future. And I think it's really, really interesting, and I would say it's almost sort of the gold standard model of what the reptile hobby should work towards. Now, it's not a realistic idea for everybody, but I think for the big players in the hobby, people like Snake Discovery, it's a really, really interesting idea. So she does let us know what that's going to look like and how the future is going to unfold for them. I really hope you enjoyed this conversation. Emily was an awesome person to chat with. She's full of knowledge, and you can see how excited she is with the work that she's doing. Enjoy the show. If you'd like to support myself as well as the production of the show, make sure you go to animalsathome.ca/podcast. You can pick yourself up an Animals at Home t-shirt, and $5 gets donated to an Amazon Rainforest Conservancy. Hi, I'm Dillon, and you're listening to the Animals at Home podcast. It seems like winter's starting early this year.
Yeah, it seems like there's no transition between any of the seasons this year. It just went straight from summer to fall and then fall directly to winter. There's no leeway.
Yeah, there was no spring. The snow just disappeared. There was no water or anything. It just evaporated into the sky.
Yeah, it did.
All right, you can hear me okay and everything?
Yep, you can hear me?
Yes. Okay, perfect. So, Emily, thank you very much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you are somebody who has absolutely exploded onto the reptile scene within the last 12 months. And I want to talk about that. We will get into that in a little bit, because I do really think that Snake Discovery is probably the fastest growing reptile channel on YouTube in the history of YouTube. I really think that's probably true. But let's rewind all the way back to when you were a kid. Is animal passion something that was always there?
Yeah, I'd always been into, I was not afraid of any animals, but I was definitely had a passion for cats when I was very young. But then I learned that I was allergic to cats and dogs. And so I, in 5th grade, got my first parakeet. And that's what introduced me to the world of exotic pets. So I had birds from 5th grade until, actually now I still do, but I've had a variety of things from several macaws. I've had African greys. I've fostered other types too. But then I switched over to reptiles when I learned how easy they are to take care of compared to birds, because reptiles don't chew on your furniture or squawk or need attention every day. So we still have our blue and gold macaw Cheyenne, but we're definitely more into the reptile world now.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I used to have budgies, and I was really wanting to get an African gray, and you don't realize how much work they are and how much mess they make. They are so messy.
Yes, there's a huge mess involved, but from their food to their poop.
Yes, yeah, and they're definitely noisy too. So how old were you when you got your first reptile?
I was 19, I think. So I didn't get into reptiles till quite a bit later. I think that was when, and that technically wasn't even mine. That was my husband Ed and myself owned a ball python. That was really his, I guess you should say it. So my first technical snake wasn't until I was 22. That was my bull snake, I guess.
Wow, late start.
Yes, but I had a lot of experience working with reptiles at the pet store I was at. So I kind of knew how to take care of them a bit.
Sure. And then you went to school for something to do with animals as well. Is that right?
Yeah, so I started, my major when I first went into college was business management and entrepreneurship, or however you pronounce that. And then I took my first accounting class and learned, oh my gosh, this is not what I want to do. So I switched to fisheries and wildlife, which pretty much trained me to be a wildlife biologist and to conduct field surveys and walk transects, do counts. But, that just wasn't right for me either. So I kind of moved around and eventually fell where I am now.
So as a child, did you have a dream job that involved animals, or did you were really thinking business was the way to go?
So apparently when I was really young, my dad told me that when he asked what I wanted to do when I grew up, I said I'd either want to be an astronaut or the person who sells popcorn at the movie theater.
Oh, wow.
I guess those are my two goals. I wanted to be either one of those. But when I by high school time, I was considering all sorts of different things. For a little while, I was considering being a paramedic. Then I realized I can't stand needles or blood, so that didn't work out. And then for quite a while, it was a veterinarian or a vet tech with specializing in birds or avian, I guess, just influence or a specialty there. So that has, I guess I've stayed with the animal theme ever since, just never actually became a vet.
Yes, well, I think the vet is, I've said this before on the show, that you have like vet, zookeeper, and wildlife researcher. Those are like the three dream jobs as a young kid, especially if you have the animal passion. I haven't heard a popcorn salesperson before, but that's pretty good too.
I had my goals set high.
Yeah, you had quite a spectrum.
I sure did, between that and an astronaut.
Yeah. And then, so at some point, Reptiles transitioned from just a hobby to a business at some point. And so did you start with breeding as a business, or did snake discovery kind of sneak in there before that?
I started the program business beforehand. So what happened was after college, after I got my bachelor's in fisheries and wildlife, I started working as a naturalist for the Minnesota DNR. So everyone called me a ranger there, but my job really was to teach people about natural resources. So I created programs about trees and about geology and about insects, and I just taught the public about them. So unfortunately, that job was temporary, and it was a limit of 2 summers at the same park. And after that, you could either move to another park, or you had to find something else. And I couldn't find a park that I liked as much as the one I was at, and I couldn't find a position that was open. Really, there was nothing available for me. So I worked at a large retail pet store that I had previously been working at for about 5 years or so. So I went back there. I was a manager there for a couple of years. And then I decided that, I liked doing those programs a lot, and I wanted to continue them on my own. And my favorite program I did was about reptiles, and it incorporated the albino ball python that Ed and I had, that one snake we had back in the day. And I was like, I kind of want to keep doing this. So with Ed being as supportive as he is, he was like, hey, you should try it. So I left the pet store. I don't want to say the name. I left the pet store, and I started the business, and it's been taking off ever since.
Wow. So were you very worried to do that, or did you just feel totally confident to jump in?
I was pretty worried. I'm definitely a worrywart in general, but I did kind of start it about maybe 6 months before I actually left that pet store, just to see if there'd be interest. And there definitely was. It was pretty minimal at first, but it was enough for me to grab onto and take off from. So I think since I had the knowledge, or since I knew that there was at least some demand out there for reptile programs, that gave me the confidence I needed to just do it completely and dedicate 100% to it.
Sure. So what did it look like in those early days? Because when people say snake discovery, they think the YouTube channel, obviously at this point, but really that's nothing. It had nothing to do with the YouTube channel. That was the original, was something not completely different, but that was the main focus, was something else.
It really was. So the original snake discovery was just educational reptile programs at birthday parties, schools, scouts, libraries. I do a lot of library programs. And I actually do senior centers. So it was just me going out there and teaching people about reptiles. But then when I would do these programs and, sorry, my light turned off again.
No worries.
I would do these programs and have a big crowd, and people would still have questions about the reptiles because they'd fall in love with the gecko I used and they wanted one of their own. And with so many people around, while I'm trying to keep an eye on all the reptiles that people are handling at the time, I just didn't have time to answer all those questions. So I started making videos to refer people to, so that they could kind of learn on their own. And those were the videos I put on YouTube. And I would just tell people, hey, you want to learn about geckos? I actually made a video about that. You can watch that here. And it was partially because I enjoyed teaching on video form. I found it fun. And also so that I could kind of sneak out of the library sooner because I didn't have to stay so long talking to the people.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. So how many animals would you bring to an event?
I bring, and I used to, and I still do bring about the same amount. I bring a salamander, a turtle, I bring a fat-tailed gecko, And I bring probably around 7 or 8 snakes, and I have a few different themes to my programs. So sometimes it'll be just all my turtles that I bring, and it'll be all exotic reptiles or all native ones to the area. But most teachers at schools want me to teach the students about what they'll find outside. So 95% of my programs are the native reptile program.
Oh, that's very cool. What are some of the most rewarding parts of that part of the job?
For these programs, I love seeing kids who are terrified of snakes at the beginning, and after the 45-minute program, they want to touch everything and they want to hold all of the snakes. And getting them to touch their first snake without pulling away and being scared is so rewarding. And I just love seeing that transition.
Yeah, that's really cool. And that totally changes the way forever, right? The kid's going to have a completely different experience because probably up until that point, they've not experienced snake before. They've only seen or kind of imagined it in their mind how scary it would be.
Right, and I think the media teaches us to be afraid of snakes because snakes are always the antagonist in stories. So I can't blame the kids for being afraid of them, especially if their parents have a phobia and they inflict that on their kid. So I do have a tougher time getting adults over a fear of snakes than I do kids, because kids are more malleable at that age. But I do try to work with all ages to get over that fear. And nowadays, it seems like the more programs I do, the less afraid of snakes they are.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Is there some challenges running a business where you're bringing animals to a location and obviously, especially in where you are in northern United States, there's temperatures you have to deal with. And what are some of the tricky parts of running and operating a business like that?
It can get tricky in both the summer and the winter. I make sure in the winter, I have a diesel car, so they run pretty hot, which is nice. And if I need to, I'll just turn on the car for a while, like 15 minutes before I go. I hate doing it because I hate wasting fuel. But we, in the summertime, it's just basically just needed in order to keep the animals safe and warm. So I'll do it if I need to. And in the summer, I run on biodiesel. We kind of put together some biodiesel here and there with used vegetable oil. So if it runs a little longer with AC on, then I don't feel as bad. But yeah, it fluctuates dramatically up here in the Midwest. So I do have to be careful. Even such things as I keep the reptiles in small sterile travel bins inside of a large bin that contains them all. But if that bin's in my back seat where it always is and the sun's beating on it, then I have to keep that in mind too to make sure they don't get too hot inside. So it's just constantly kind of keeping a mental note of how the reptiles are doing in the back.
Yeah, for sure. That would be kind of tricky. What about at the events themselves? Have you had any bites or anything that you've had to deal with?
Thankfully, no. The reptiles I have are really well behaved. I think I both lucked out with them and I spent enough time with them handling them to make sure that they're kid ready. And what I do with the reptiles before they go to a program is I'll kind of give them to family members and I'll be like, here, hold this snake like a kid might. So maybe not totally steady and kind of touching the face a little bit. I make sure that they're okay with having their head touched before they go to programs. And as long as they pass all those tests, then they slowly get incorporated into the programs. But fights with people don't really happen either, thankfully, other than kids not wanting to share a snake that they're holding.
Yeah. Oh, that's understandable.
I'd be that kid too.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's really interesting. So that's kind of how the seed of the business started, and obviously, there's this other side to it that is just I have these notes here when I write notes before I talk with somebody, and I have YouTube with an arrow and it says boom next to it.
Yes.
I think that's the only way to describe your YouTube channel. And I mean, everyone that's listening to this is going to be familiar with you or with who you are, but just to break down some stats for the listeners, about a year ago, you recorded 1,000 subscriber special.
That's right. Yep. Man, that was a year ago already. Huh.
And about 5 months ago, you recorded your 100,000 subscriber schedule or special. And you are now at 750,000 subscribers. And, the last few weeks, you've had a few days of over 1 million views and getting 10 to 12,000 subscribers a day.
I didn't know that we surpassed the 750. That's awesome. We were kind of keeping an eye on that lately.
Yeah, I checked this morning. I think it was 751 right before we started this.
Oh, awesome. It was completely unexpected for it to take off as it did, which I'm very flattered. I'm very humbled that people enjoy watching our videos so much. It's just funny, though, that it started as, as just people who go to my programs, they can learn more on these videos. But yeah, I love how it's turning out. It's been a really fun adventure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's almost part of the success is that you weren't doing it to make this giant YouTube following, and I think that gives it sort of like an authenticity, right? It's not sensationalized. You don't have clickbait. It's just the basic information. Was there a video or something that you noticed all of a sudden a spike in views and subscribers when you published it?
There's been a few little spikes, and the first one was probably the legless lizard video, just because it was such a weird animal. I think people found it interesting, and then it took off. But our biggest videos are definitely the egg laying videos and the hatching videos, where we cut open the eggs a little to peek inside. I think people like that surprise factor to them, like, oh, what's going to be inside of the egg, or how many eggs will she lay? And it's really cool, like sharing those experiences with everyone, because those are my favorite times of the year too, when snakes lay eggs or when snakes are hatching. But we make it our goal, or we've had an odd goal, I should say, to never ask anyone to subscribe on the channel. And to date, we have never asked anybody to subscribe in a video, like and subscribe and comment below. We make it a point not to do that, because it kind of irritates us when people really push that on their own channels.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I that totally makes sense. And obviously, it's the content that's driving, because I do wonder that sometimes. You really wonder, like, do you have to say subscribe, please subscribe and like every time? And it's obviously you don't. It's the content that drives the subscriptions. And yeah, it's just really wild. Do you feel like 2 weeks ago I interviewed, I'm not sure if you know who Joey Mullen is from the King of DIY YouTube channel?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so I just released an episode last week with him, and he had talked about some of that pressure that he now feels with having he's got 1 million plus subscribers, and there is that, you have to make videos, and sometimes the viewers kind of forget that there's a personal life going on behind the camera. Do you feel any of that pressure?
A little bit more so that everyone's demanding merch right now. So I'm so busy because I have these programs. I also run exotic pet expos in my area, and I do the YouTube channel, that I have kind of a trifecta going, and I'm trying to, like, whenever I have free time, squeeze in new projects. But every once in a while, between merch demand, which we are working on, and video requests, and we get so many emails nowadays for people wanting our baby reptiles, that it's tough to keep up. Like, honestly, it takes a lot of time.
Well, it's really amazing. Like, imagine 750,000 people. Now, obviously, not everybody watches every single video, but you've had several videos well into the 4 or 5 million, and it's a really unbelievable amount of people. Like, if you think about getting 10,000 new subscribers a day, it's almost hard to imagine.
I remember back in the day, we would be cheering if we got 100 subscribers that day. It's crazy how things change.
Yeah, it's very interesting. How is it going to, a reptile expo? Or, like, I know you went to Tinley Park recently. These experiences must be very different for you now.
Yeah, well, it is different because we still want to shop and look at all the reptiles ourselves. And we love the Tinley show because we run our own shows up here, and it's so nice to go to a show where we can just enjoy as a buyer, as a consumer, and not having to run around making sure all the vendors are happy and so forth. But now with the addition of YouTube channel taking off, it's been amazing meeting all these people who truly enjoy our videos, and they like learning about reptiles, because honestly, the people who enjoy the channel, we figure they enjoy learning. So it's neat to see so many people out there taking that extra step to learn about reptiles they don't even keep. And it's, again, very humbling when you're recognized.
Yeah, well, it's definitely like you guys have kind of created a show, right? Like, people aren't necessarily going to get a legless lizard, but now all of a sudden they're interested in how to care for it, which is just kind of wild.
Right, which can be good. It can also be bad, like impulse purchases. Oh, I want a legless lizard now. So, I mean, we try not to say too much about, where you can get one, but because we figure, if people really want one, they can do that extra research, and then maybe throughout that research, they'll realize it's not the right pet for them. But
yeah.
It's still fun just spreading knowledge about cool critters.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, you guys are really breaking a lot of those, YouTube rules. Like, you're not asking for subscribes, and you're not, I don't think you post on a consistent schedule either, right? You post a video when you have time to make one.
Well, we used to do like just once a week, and for the last, I think we just passed a year of doing this, we now do twice a week on Tuesday, Fridays. But we don't have them go up at a certain time of day, because I have programs and we have shows that we run. So sometimes they get put up at 8 a.m. Sometimes it's at midnight, or it kind of crosses over into the next day. but it is what it is.
Yeah, no, definitely. Do you feel stressed about making content, or because you have so many, ideas from your fans, it's okay?
I have like a list on my phone of ideas to go through. Like if I'm ever thinking, oh, what should we film this week? We try to film 2 to 3 videos every week because I mean we post 2 every week, and I always have the intention of working ahead, and whether or not that actually happens is up in the air. But Ed works the night shift, and he has Sunday, Monday, Tuesday off. So those are the days. I usually have programs on Sunday, so that day's out. So together we have Monday and Tuesday to film our videos, and then when he's off at work at night is when I edit them later in the week. So we try to, like yesterday we filmed a couple. Today we're going to try to film one more so I can start working ahead. It can get stressful at times though, for sure.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that I think a lot of times people forget is the amount of work it is to edit. Like filming is only half the job. Editing really takes a long time.
It does. It takes me probably between 4 and 5 hours for a video to put together if it's like one of our 10-minute videos. I've gotten pretty good at putting them together, but it still is a time consumer.
Definitely, yeah. And now your day must be full from night to the end of the day, because obviously, like you said, reptiles are fortunately fairly easy to take care of, but not when you have, like, how many do you have right now? Do you have a number?
No, it kind of fluctuates. So we probably have around 75 to 85, I guess, with the new bull snakes, around 85 snakes. And then between the 2 of us, and those include Ed's reticulated pythons and his green tree pythons, things like that. But we also have the 2 legless lizards, probably around 6, 7 turtles, the alligator, and various other animals you don't really see on the channel much, like the fish and our bird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's it's a lot of work for sure.
It's a lot.
Do you have
every day cleaning or feeding someone?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Do you have a favorite animal? Maybe it's not a good question because everybody's your favorite, but
my favorite animal out of, like, if there was a fire and I could only save one, it'd be Cheyenne, my blue and gold macaw. I still have a huge soft spot for macaws. And she was the ring bearer at our wedding. I think it's the intellectual level that they have. Like, they're so smart that she's just part of the family. So her aside, like between all the reptiles, I do really like Rex, our alligator. As much as a sassy gator as she can be, she's still up there on my favorites. But my favorite snake is Janet, our bull snake. She was my first snake I ever got when I was 22, and she's the one who kind of started the programs. So she's definitely, Janet's the boy.
Yeah,
it's so confusing when the names are mixed up.
Yeah, that is confusing. So that's a story that I love to hear, because it is, you've had these animals for a long time. It's not like you're just getting rid of them once you're tired of them. And obviously you have a revolving door, probably a little bit, but you still have some of those animals that you've had for a long time, and they're in your care, and they'll be in your care. I'm sure that's your plan forever.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. Sometimes things happen and projects change, and you don't want to pursue a certain genetic morph of hognoses, but you want to check out something else instead. Like we recently had a pair of het pink pastel hognoses, but they just weren't good eaters, and they were smaller than they should have been. Plus, they were both males. Bought a pair. They ended up being boys. So we rehomed those to families who could give them good homes so that we can pursue a different project instead. So things do happen, but for the most part, we do plan on keeping them their entire life, especially the ones that have that sentimental value to us.
Yeah, definitely. And I kind of feel the same way about my animals. It's like, it'd be so hard to get rid of some of those first ones, like, of course that would make more space and all that, but they're just those original animals.
Yeah, exactly. You can't let those go.
No way. And I think you also have some, I shouldn't say uncommon, but fairly uncommon animals in the hobby. Like bull snakes are not super common. Is there a reason? Maybe they're more common where you are, but I don't ever see people with bull snakes where I am.
They're definitely less common than like corns, kings, and milk snakes and ball pythons. But I think we're starting to get their popularity up a little bit just because they're such an underrated species. They get a bad rap because they have attitudes, and they do sometimes have attitudes straight out of the egg. Like they'll come out of the egg and they'll be hissing and rattling their tail already. But if you handle them on a regular basis, they calm down. And Janet, my bull snake, is the friendliest snake we have. He's great. So we have, the bull snakes we love working with because of them being misunderstood and because they are such amazing eaters right away. Like as babies, they're not like hognoses, which, I want live. I want toad scented only. But the bull snakes will eat anything. They don't care. They're garbage disposals. It's great.
And they have really cool characteristics, just how they act, right? Like you have that rattling tail, and they sort of rear up like a rattlesnake. Is that some of the stuff that draws you to them?
Right. Yeah, that and they're kind of talkative. I tell people, like if one of ours is asleep, and you can't tell because their eyes are open all the time. If you kind of touch one while they're asleep, they hiss at you when they wake up. And it's not that they're being mean; it's just kind of what they do. They like to vocalize. They like to hiss from time to time. It seems.
Yeah.
But yeah, between that and the endless color morphs and combinations that there are, there's just always something exciting with bull snakes going on.
Yeah, and morphs is something that I've not really thought about in terms of bull snakes before, but I guess that's part of what you guys are focusing on in your breeding operation.
Yeah. There's a lot of times they have like they're het for 4 different traits. So then if you get the right odds, you can get a combination of all of those. It's just so neat to see how they vary.
What are some of the morphs in a bull snake?
There is, of course, the albino and exanthic, like you see in most other snakes, but there's also white-sided. There's a couple different strains of hypomelanistic, and there's also patternless, which is kind of neat. And then you can combine all of those. So we hatched out this summer an albino hypo white-sided, and the white-sided mutation kind of has an exanthic component to it, so it'll make the snake look exanthic with also white sides. So that can kind of mess things up, but it's still really neat just to see what they look like all combined together.
Yeah, that's very cool. So in terms of the breeding that you're doing right now, I know you're breeding obviously hognose and bull snakes. Is that it, or do you have some other things on the go?
We also do garter snakes, and because we breed the albino checkered garters, and last year we had kind of the oops clutch of the weird hybrids, which were really pretty. They ended up really cool looking, and I kept one just to see what it'll look like as an adult. But next year, we hope to also breed possibly tricolor hogs. I think our female might be big enough by then. A few more hogs, few more bulls now that they're big enough. Maybe green tree pythons. We're going to hopefully pair them up in the next few weeks since they are definitely big enough to breed. The fox snakes, I would love to breed, and they're big enough. We tried this year, but our mistake was we didn't cool them off enough during the winter. Fox snakes like it cold. They like it 40 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter throughout brumation, so we're actually going to buy like a wine chiller this year to actually get them down cold enough. Then we'll be doing the rat corn mixes because we're trying to get the scaleless gene to display itself in the babies. And I think that's about everything for this coming year. I'll probably think of more later on.
Yeah, that's definitely a fair amount. There's
Yes.
That is one of the interesting things. It's really amazing how cold some of those colubrids have to get before it sort of triggers that breeding behavior, right?
It really is. Yeah, it's like how can you enjoy being that cold? Do you need to be that cold in order to breed? So the bull snakes, you just throw them in the basement, and if it's not as cold as the recommended 55 degrees, they don't care. They breed anyway in the spring. That's another reason why I like bull snakes.
They're easygoing.
They vary. Yes, definitely. I guess. Oh, we'll also be breeding the Cuban false chameleons, which we are currently hatching out a couple here and there, and the fat-tailed geckos we'll have in the spring.
Gotcha.
About the lizards.
So one of the things I've heard you say before is on your videos is you guys are very protective over making sure you're not breeding genetic, animals that have poor genetics. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so for example, the spider morph of ball pythons, with all the neurological issues that come with it, that's going to be, we don't breed ball pythons anyway, but if we did, we would not pursue the spider morph or therefore the Woma morph, which has spider incorporated into it. That's also one of the reasons why we rehomed that pair of, the male-male pair of het pink pastel hogs, because we've also heard there's neurological issues with those. But that one seems to be a little more controversial because I've seen quite a few pink pastels and they all seem genetically and neurologically fine to me. But yeah, if we know there's something wrong with a certain morph, we're not going to pursue it because the purpose of breeding is to better the species, not to go the other way.
Yeah, and it's something I've talked about on the show several times, and it is unfortunate that those and jaguar morph in the carpet python is the same way as the spider. It's basically the exact same genetic mutation, and you get that head wobble, and it's a head wobble. It's like, well, no, that's actually a disorder, and the animal can't function properly. And I think it's a shame that, and as a hobby, we just keep perpetuating it. Like, it's kind of a cool morph, but it's not worth it, in my opinion, for the animal. And one of the things I've said before on the show is that with snakes, because they don't have legs, they can get away with a wobble. It doesn't affect them. If they had legs, they wouldn't be able to walk straight, and we wouldn't be doing it. So that's where I think we need to kind of reanalyze what we're doing with some of these genes.
Yeah, definitely. There's also the issue with, I guess, the scaleless or the silky bearded dragons, because the males are pretty brutal during breeding. And so you don't want to breed a scaled bearded dragon to a scaleless female, because she's just going to get beat up. So there's just, those ethical dilemmas to keep in mind.
Yeah, and there's really nobody kind of we can't control it. Like, I know in Australia things are very restricted, and I interviewed someone that lives in Australia, and I'm really amazed at the amount of bylaws that govern the reptile hobby, and we don't have anything like that here. And partly that's good because we have the freedom to own as many animals as we want for the most part, depending where you live. But then there's this sort of unrestrained, industrialized breeding.
Yeah, there really is. People will just do what they want to, though, and I think eventually, if there's enough negativity against certain morphs, maybe we will stop them because of peer pressure. But if not, then they're just going to keep continuing.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that you deal with, obviously, is you do take in animals that are rescue type animals that need a better home. That's got to be challenging because you're dealing with animals that are very sick, and a lot of time it's just 100% due to poor care.
Yeah, 99% of the time, if you have a health issue with your reptile, it's due to a something with the husbandry is off. But yeah, I mean, they do require a lot more attention from us. So sometimes we have to say no to certain rescued animals just because we know it'll be too much for us to handle, in addition to taking care of everything we already have. But in certain cases, like with our garter snake that got hit by a lawnmower, like that one pulled at my heartstrings, and we had to take him in, and I'm so glad that we did. But we do have a good relationship with our veterinarian. It's a bit of a drive to get to her, but she is willing to help us out with any reptile issues we have. And we do have some medications on hand, some that I mentioned on the channel, some that I don't, because if you're newer in the reptile world, you don't want to be self-diagnosing your reptiles and self-medicating. We kind of know which ones are all right to use, which ones a vet would recommend in certain instances that we go with, and we make that educated decision ourselves to do. But it's not something we would recommend for a newbie.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think reptiles are subjected to such poor care a lot of the time? Like, I don't know if this is true, but I kind of always say it, that when you look in your local classifieds, it's the reptiles that are always in the worst condition than the other animals like mammals and such.
I think it's because they're so hardy that they get taken advantage of because of that. They are able to hide illnesses. They can survive in horrible conditions. And even if they're rescued afterwards, they just bounce right back. And people think, oh, he'll be fine because, they're just such resilient animals. And unfortunately, that's what people stick with, and they lack on caring for them properly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I guess on that note, I know there's two animals that I wanted to chat with you about in terms of kind of the rescue. One is the unfortunate Michelle that you had lost, I think just maybe a couple months ago. And then obviously the Rex, the alligator as well. Can you talk about the condition that they were in and then what you did with them when you got them?
Yeah, so Michelle had always had something odd with one of her back feet and with the end of her shell, the posterior end of her lower shell. We weren't sure what it was, but we were trying to treat it for like a fungus, and it just all of a sudden boomed and went downhill, negatively boomed. And it just seemed like that took over. But it was something that the vet wasn't able to suggest anything at that point. So we just kept doing what we were doing, but it just unfortunately wasn't working out. So it was really sad because she was also an older turtle, since somebody had her in a small tank for several years. So she had several issues going on because of how stunted she was and her shell issues as well. Now with Rex, he or she just learned that she's a girl. I'm still getting used to that. But Rex, we never wanted an alligator. And for those of you who don't know Rex is an American alligator from the Everglades, like legit from Florida. Her old owner brought her back as a hatchling in the 80s and kept her kind of for the novelty of it and put her in this 4-foot wooden box, which in the 80s, that was the acceptable way to take care of alligators or large lizards. But then she was never upgraded from that enclosure after she so severely outgrew it. So I went to this guy's house. He's an older gentleman now, and he works in a bonsai tree nursery or garden, and he needed help. And being a naturalist myself, I really like trees too. I'm like ridiculously obsessed with trees. So I went over to his house and helped him out. And then I went into this house one day and saw this alligator that was about 3 feet long in this 4-foot-ish wooden box. And I spent the next 6 months kind of planting a seed in his ear saying, your alligator really needs more space. And eventually one day, 6 months later, he asked if I wanted her. And we didn't want an alligator, but we wanted her out of that situation. So we made it work, and we renovated a guest bedroom in our house downstairs. And that's how we ended up with an alligator.
So was it kind of in the back of your mind, you wanted to get him to give it to you, or were you just really hoping that he would make the conditions better?
I knew it was a lost cause for him to improve the conditions. So once I realized that, I really started to push for him to just rehome the alligator, whether it be to our local reptile rescue, or it just worked out that he asked if I wanted her, because then I could directly take her out of there and then set her up in something more appropriate.
Has it been difficult to care for her? I mean, it's a lot of work. Is it harder than you expected, or is there, challenges that because, alligator is one of those things that everyone's like, oh, I want to get an alligator. And most people should not get alligators. What are some reasons you shouldn't get one?
They get too big. Rex works out for us because she's so severely stunted. She grew about a foot in the first 6 months we got her, and then she kind of stopped after that. But a 4-foot lizard or 4-foot alligator is very similar to taking care of like a 4-foot tegu or a monitor or something, in that they are smart animals. They move around a lot, and they need to be mentally stimulated. And because of how smart they are, they can get into things. So alligators, with their big teeth, big mouths, big tail, they can cause some damage to your house. They can, they can, if they get big enough, cause damage to you too. So alligators, just because of how large they get, are not a good pet. If they stayed 4 feet, that'd be a little bit different, but still, even then, that even just a 4-foot reptile is difficult for people to take care of, because you need like a whole room to dedicate to them. Yeah,
definitely for a lizard, for sure. That's a huge requirement. So that's actually really interesting that because by the time she came to you guys, she was already in her 30s, I guess. Is that right?
Yeah, she was 27, I guess, when we got her. Now she's 31. We've had her about 4 years. But she seems to have settled in, and this is her new home now. She's definitely acclimated. I just feel bad that she spent so many years in a small and an improper environment, and they only live 30 to 50, so we don't know how long we'll have her, but she hasn't slowed down at all. We had a bit of a scare a few months ago when one of her meals didn't agree with her stomach, but she bounced back from that.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I mean, obviously you guys have now extended her life now that she's in your care, but I'm really amazed that she actually grew once you got her.
Yeah, we were surprised too. After those first 6 months went by and we realized she grew, we were like, oh no, what did we get ourselves into? But then she kind of stopped. So, it's sad, but it was kind of a good thing at the same time.
Yeah, were you thinking like, oh my God, we're going to have a full-grown American alligator in the basement?
Yes. We were like, what do we do when she gets 6 feet?
Yeah, that is quite an undertaking for sure. And obviously being somewhere where you can't really keep her outside, having a full room is really the minimum, right? That's kind of what you have to do.
It's what you have to do, yeah. And we hope to, in the future, when we move, have some sort of outdoor enclosure with a big pond and all that. But right now we just have to keep her indoors because we're in the Midwest, and she'd only be outside for a few months of the year. Yeah,
exactly. And I know that one of the things you've done with her is you've kind of target trained her.
Yep. She'll follow a stick if I tap it on the ground. I lost the stick, have to find a new stick, but yeah, she will follow it around, which is really nice. I can lead her to one corner of the room so I can change a heat bulb or something. And then we also frisbee trained her which sounds odd, but I'm part of like a group of people who own crocodilians, and they came up with this idea as well. Whenever I walk into a room, or whenever we would walk into a room, she would rush up towards us, towards this gate/wall that we had built for her, and expecting food. She thought every time we came in, we would have food, and we wanted to curb that behavior. So we started, it initially started as showing her 2 frisbees. One, a white one, we would show her if we did not have any food. And then if we had food, we'd show her an orange frisbee. So it kind of worked. And although I think it was just a frisbee in general, she thought there was food. So we've now switched it to we don't show her anything if we don't have any food. And now if we show her the orange frisbee, we do have food and she freaks out. But now she doesn't at least freak out every time we walk in.
Yeah, and obviously that would be the dangers of owning an alligator. They're always hungry. So you gotta be careful.
Yeah, they can get fat too if you feed them as much as they want to eat.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's basically any reptile, right? They're so easy to overfeed, which is one of the other main issues in the hobby. But the target training is really interesting because it really speaks to how intelligent those creatures are.
Yeah, and that's why they need toys too, to keep them mentally stimulated. Otherwise, we could tell like maybe 2 years into owning her, she was starting to get bored. So she would start unplugging the lamps from the walls, and she would knock over her canister filter, and she'd knock over the tree that's in there. She was just bored. So we started incorporating toys into her enclosure, and that has helped dramatically. Her favorite is the simplest toy. It's this indestructible dog bowl, like the really hard rubber black food dishes, and I'll like set it on top of the water in her pool so it floats around like a boat. And then I'll go upstairs, and soon afterwards, we'll hear splashing and barrel rolling, and she grabs it and rolls it all around till it sinks, and then it's dead. And then it's okay. It's not a threat anymore. But then she'll still pick it up from underwater and thrash it around. So that is like her favorite toy.
Yeah, that's really incredible, and it's heartbreaking in a way that she spent 30 years without that, but also really inspiring that now it's crazy that even 30 years in bad conditions didn't kill that instinct to want to explore and be enriched.
Yeah, it really is. When we first got her, we took a side profile and a straight on picture of her head. And we took pictures about 3 years later, and the difference between the two is just incredible. Her snout has straightened out quite a bit, but her eyes are still abnormally large. Not as abnormally large as they were before, but she definitely looks less like a duck nowadays.
So were her eyes abnormally large for an alligator, like a full-grown alligator, or an alligator that small? Like, did her eyes continue to grow type thing?
They do, to a point, from what I understand. Like, they were huge. I mean, it's hard to describe, but yeah, I think they do continue growing along with their feet a little bit. I was told. I could be wrong there. Don't quote me on that. But certain body parts, just like if you keep a goldfish in a bowl, certain body parts will continue to grow while the rest doesn't. And that's what causes some serious health concerns in the future when things are out of proportion with each other.
Mm-hmm. And is that why the snout started to kind of curl up on itself, because it was just she was in such a small enclosure?
Yeah, it's a condition called rubber jaw, in which their jaw becomes somewhat flexible almost. And then I think it was between that and then as she was growing, she would kind of hit her snout on the sides of the box she was kept in. And that's what started to deform it and make it curve upwards. And then her teeth stick out sideways, and that could just be because of the snout curving upwards. The teeth also start moving outwards.
Wow. It's that is kind of it's amazing that she's lived through that, and that's awesome that she's in good care now. So the in terms of enrichment, because that was something I also wanted to chat with you about. I had recorded an episode maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago talking about reptile enrichment and how important I think it was. And one of the takeaways that listeners got from it, which I didn't necessarily intend, was they thought I was attacking rack systems. And I wasn't necessarily attacking rack systems because I didn't explicitly say that. I can understand why they thought that. What I was attacking was, the paper, a water dish, and that's your whole system. And I think that the industrialized breeding, and one of the things I had said is, if you're in a facility that has 10,000 animals, maybe that is the way you have to care for them, just to make sure the animals stay clean and healthy. But the issue was that these industrialized breeders are selling to kids and other people who are new, and basically saying you need a tub and a water dish and a piece of paper and you're good to go. And that's actually not the case. So you guys keep snakes in a rack system, but you do it in the way that you should do it, I think. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I see people who, like these industrial breeders, who have a ball python in a bin that they can't fully stretch out in. Like, their body takes up half of the bin, and then they have just the cave and the water dish. And that's, I think, taking it too far in regards to housing snakes in bins, where they just don't have room to stretch or anything to do. Because although snakes lack a well-developed cerebral cortex, and they might not need as much mental stimulation as like large lizards do, I still feel they need something. So we make sure to give our snakes pretty thick bedding to encourage burrowing behavior like they would do in the wild for most species. And we stick at least some sort of branch or two in there for them to slither over. And we try to mix it up too. So if you mix up if you clean them and mix up their decor, it offers new smells for the snake as well. So we're always looking for new items to put into the enclosures, and we try to at least have 1 to 2 objects of some sort, in addition to a cave on the warm end, cave on the cool end, and that water dish.
Mm-hmm. What are some of those objects you use? Because I've seen a few of them in your videos, but can you list a couple? Because they're just random things.
Oh, they're totally random, yeah. So we actually go to monthly Herpetological Society meetings, and people will bring unwanted decor there, and we'll pick and choose from that every month to introduce new things into their enclosures. But there'll be things like a half log or a bridge, or even like something as simple as a PVC tube. That can be a tube for them to slither through or over. And if you half bury that, they kind of like it. But yeah, really anything. It's just a flat piece of slate that you can like set on top of a rock or angle so they can go up or on top or underneath it. You just have to get creative sometimes.
Yeah, and you have to sacrifice obviously some financials to pay for some of these things, even though it's not expensive. But I think it's so important because even though you might not see a snake is not going to interact with a ceramic tile in the same way that Rex interacts with his fun water dish toy, but just the act of slithering over it is that form of enrichment, and it's not just. I really think that keeping them in a plain environment just turns their brain to mush, kind of thing.
Yeah, and having obstacles in there instead gives them something to do, keeps them mentally sharper than they would be if they didn't have any of that. I could be wrong, but I personally think that it's just healthy for any animal to have something other than a barren enclosure to check out and explore.
Yeah, and you're not wrong, because there is lots of research that shows that. Of course, there's tons of research for turtles and lizards and crocodilians, especially learning, but there is some studies showing that snakes, have maybe a rudimentary ability to learn and maybe remember certain things, and it's so important that we don't let the hobby slip down that way.
Definitely, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so that's what's great about your channel is you are showing a good way to keep snakes in a rack. You guys have a lot of animals. It would be impossible to have all these display enclosures, and a lot of those animals don't necessarily want to be on display because they're animals that burrow and spend a lot of time underground type thing.
Yeah, like hognoses, if you keep them in too big of an enclosure, they get stressed out and then they don't want to eat. Now, you might be thinking, yeah, well, they have unlimited space in the wild, but they spend most of their time in kind of a smaller macro or micro environment of sorts, some smaller area that they consider their territory that they feel safe and secure in. But if you have a large enclosure that's very open, they don't know quite where to go. So if you were to fill it up with tons of caves, tons of branches, you could probably get away with it. But it's easier just to keep them in something smaller that they're automatically going to feel more comfortable in.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little more quiet, and I mean, eating is the easiest way to see if an animal is stressed or not. And I think that's one of the things that people do say, oh, snakes do hide all the time, so I can just kind of put them in here with nothing. And it's like, that's not true. Just because the hognose does hide all the time, it's still important to provide it with an environment that is quiet and not maybe on display, but also with enrichment climbing. And I don't know how much hognoses climb, but obviously they go through tubes and whatnot.
Yeah, we try to mimic some natural behaviors or encourage those behaviors that they would normally do in the wild. Like for the hognose snakes, we give them deeper bedding so that they can burrow around. And for like the garter snakes, they like to bask in the sun. So we'll offer them a couple ledges to slither up onto with a basking light instead of a heat mat from below. So we try to think of their natural behavior in the wild and how we can encourage that in captivity.
Yeah, that's the best tip is go learn how they are in the wild and then try to get them to show you those behaviors. And really, It's just through enrichment. Do you have any animals that are on your wish list? I'm sure you have tons, but do you have any that you think you'll get in the next year or so?
We really like black-headed pythons, but they're ridiculously expensive. So someday, maybe we'll have a pair of those. We would love those. I also really like dragon snakes. I think they're so cool, but they're frog eaters. So I know I don't right now have the resources to feed a snake purely frogs. So I'm not getting one right now until I do, but that would be tempting someday. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Mostly just the black-headeds and those dragon snakes now that I think about it. Maybe like more garter snakes of various species or locales. Those are always fun. Because they're so active, they're curious.
Yeah, I was going to say, what attracted you to garter snakes? Because that's another kind of not unusual species, but not a lot of people have garter snakes as in the hobby.
I think it's because everyone thinks, it's just going to musk all over you every time you hold it, which isn't true. They will at first, but once they get used to it, they stop all that. But I got my first garter snake to incorporate in my programs to teach people about yet another native species, especially one that they see all the time. I definitely wanted a garter snake. And once I got the one and set her up in I think I just had the single one. She was a bit younger, so I had her in like a 10-gallon tank with a basking light. And I realized how curious they are and how explorative they are. And they'll recognize you as the person who brings them food, so they'll follow you around the tank. I just loved their little personalities. And then I learned that you can cohab these species together, and you can even cohab garter snakes with water snakes. So what we did, excuse me, was we got a big like 40-gallon tank and we put a couple in there, and they get along. They do great. So I think if you want a snake that you can have multiples in an enclosure, a garter snake is an excellent option.
Yeah, that's interesting. I kind of forgot about the cohabiting. And I've caught wild garter snakes, and I've never been musked on by a wild one. So I mean, obviously, if you habituate a captive bred one to being handled, they're not going to be musking all the time. What do you feed them?
Oh, everything. They'll get tilapia, because when you feed them fish, you have to be careful what species of fish you feed a garter snake, since some contain thiamine, and that can cause neurological issues. So we feed them thiamine-free fish like tilapia. They'll also get worms, and they'll eat rodents. Really, it's just those three, but we'll rotate between those three, and then we'll calcium powder anything that doesn't have many bones, like worms. We calcium powder those. And the fish, since it's the fish muscle that they eat, since we buy fillets and kind of slice them up, we'll dust those with calcium too to make up for the lack of bones in it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so you guys are growing at such a rate, and you have all these different things going on, and people are asking you to do merch, and you're going to be kind of getting pulled in all directions. What are your plans for the future with snake discovery? Do you kind of just want to keep going as it is now, or do you have a vision that brings other people on?
So our plan, and we haven't really said much about this because it's still kind of new and in the works, is we want to open up a reptile educational facility in the Hudson area. So we want to have kind of an indoor zoo, but the enclosures will be informative with educational signs on each. And we can bring our program animals there, or some of the animals people like on the channel there, so people can meet them in person. And that'll be tied into kind of a retail store for reptiles that we breed, and we can start selling some reptile supplies that we recommend. And I can also, my dream for this building is I want a separate room that I can do birthday parties in, or educational programs that would lead right into the zoo portion afterwards. So we kind of have it in our heads right now, but we just got approval yesterday from the town saying it would be allowed. So we just have to find the building now, and
right.
That's in our budget.
Well, that's amazing. I mean, I think that system is really what the hobby needs to move towards. Like, not every breeder can have an operation like that, obviously, but having a place where people can learn, people can buy the products that you recommend as a breeder, it's huge, because we have so many, I think, overproduction of animals, and so many people getting them who don't know anything about how to care for it, and then don't want it in a year.
Yeah, it's amazing how many reptiles are in the rescue that we work with in the Twin Cities. It's all ball pythons and corn snakes and bearded dragons, the starters people get, and then after a year or two, they get bored of them and give them up. It's just really unfortunate that people move on so quickly from an exotic pet that lives like upwards of 20 years, 30 years.
That's the other killer with reptiles is I mean, it's great for them, but they live for so long that it's a commitment, and so many reptiles are sold without understanding the commitment. Like, I have a crested gecko behind me that I've had since 2007. He's like 13 years old. He was already 2 or 3 when I got him, and he's just as healthy as he ever was.
Oh yeah, they don't slow down until the very end, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, and you're getting a kid a gecko. He might be 30 when that thing passes away. That's a big commitment.
Yeah, and what kills me is when you go to these expos and you see a family bringing home a little baby sulcata tortoise. Like, do you not realize how big that thing's going to get and how long it's going to live? That's going to end up in a rescue in 2-3 years when it's about a foot in diameter. And when you see alligators for sale, they're always between 3 and 4 feet, because that's the size that people can no longer take care of them. And it's like, were you not thinking of what you're going to do when it gets that big? It's depressing sometimes.
It's super depressing, and it's the responsibilities on the breeders is really heavy on them to really make sure they're not selling a turtle that's going to live or a tortoise that's going to live 80 years to somebody that's never owned a tortoise before, because there's just no way you can plan to have that tortoise your whole life. It's literally going to outlive you.
Right, exactly. There's a reptile zoo kind of near me. It's more of like a tourist trap type of zoo, and they sell hatchling American alligators there, like to pets. I know, it drives me crazy. They're like $200 or something, but they just sell them. It's like, how can you do that? How can you morally be all right with that? I don't understand it.
Yeah, that's amazing actually that they do that, because that's not only a risk for the animal, but it's obviously a risk for the people they're selling them to.
Right. If it was like a dwarf caiman, that'd be one thing. But American alligator, like full on, it's just irking to us.
Yeah, no, definitely. So yeah, I mean, that's a really cool model that, you can educate people and maybe even talk people out of getting reptiles. They can come to the facility and look at them, and that could be their, their fulfilling reptile experience, and maybe come back once every couple of weeks, but you don't need to own one.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what we're hoping for, is have a few adult animals that get large on display, like a large tegu or maybe a monitor, and say, okay, if you get a tegu, this is what you're going to have in 4 years from now. Are you okay? Can you house that properly? And kind of make them think over their decision again.
Yeah, it's that focusing on the adult care of the animals that are being sold is something that doesn't happen, and I think that's really where it needs to shift to. Because you're right, it's like if you're getting a 6-foot monitor, do you have a room to keep it in, or are you putting it in a small enclosure while it's a baby and you're not thinking that far?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people don't think that far in advance sometimes, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, especially when you're dealing with real lives. Like the animals they're real. So and they are very intelligent, despite what people think. And it can be very hard on the industry, because the other side of it is we have people who actually don't want us to keep exotic animals, and it gives them a lot of ammo to say, hey, like, look at how bad you guys are caring for them. Why would we let you do it anyway?
Right, and I think captive breeding is very important to have around. Like, say, crested geckos, they were thought to be extinct until the 90s, and then we rediscovered them, and thanks to captive breeding efforts, they're now so readily available that we can own them as pets. Same with like the sulcata tortoise. Those we brought back from the brink of extinction because of captive breeding. But sulcata tortoises are one that, I think it's great we brought them back, but they should almost just be kept in zoos or professional facilities. Those should not be on the pet trade. As much as we want to encourage people to get into reptiles, they need to stick with species, and breeders should recommend species that are going to be easily taken care of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that side to the hobby, that we do kind of act as a satellite Noah's Ark for those animals that are really struggling, and then it allows, even if they do disappear in the wild, which would be terrible, we would still have them on the earth to look at. And jumping really far back for a second, thinking about that hybrid mistake that you guys had made with the garter snakes. Do you call that a mistake because you would rather not breed a hybrid?
Yeah, I mean, it's debatable. I mean, it was an accident because I didn't move that albino checkered male out of there soon enough, but I should have known to just separate them immediately because it didn't take long for him to do his job. But I think with hybrids, it's more acceptable as long as you are very open to telling the person what it is. It's when people say, oh yeah, that's just a plains garter snake, but it's actually a mutt and it's a mixture. That's when there's a moral dilemma. But if someone is very transparent and okay, this is 50% ribbon snake, 25% this, 25% that, and especially if someone's just keeping it as a pet, then I think it's a little bit more acceptable. But in an ideal world, or in a perfect world, it would be best to keep species specific, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. And if they're keeping it as a pet, it's not a problem. But you're right. The biggest issue is when they're not labeled properly, and then you think you're breeding one, and then they go breed them, right? And they don't know what they're breeding.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Then we kind of muddy up the bloodlines out there. The same thing with macaws. People will breed different macaws together to see what colors they get. But once you breed second or third generation, you start not knowing exactly what's in there. And so that animal gets taken out of breeding forever because you don't know what you're breeding.
Exactly. Are macaws difficult to breed?
Yeah, they're a lot more difficult than snakes are. I've never bred macaws myself. I'm more just taken, one at a time or rescues and give them a new home. But for the breeders who have them, there's a lot more of a time commitment with raising babies because it takes like 6 months for them sometimes to wean. So That's a lot of hand feeding formula, and you have to hand feed them every several hours, unlike reptiles.
Yeah.
Crazy time commitment.
So that's kind of good in a way. It doesn't allow because not everybody should have a macaw either, despite how beautiful they are. Most people probably shouldn't have one because of how much work it is, and it would be a shame probably if it was too easy to breed them. And that's kind of the issue I think that we have in the reptile hobby.
Yeah, I can see that. Snakes are a good one because snakes are so easy to take care of. That's going to be my number one recommended reptile for a beginner, is just a snake, a good corn snake. But then if they go to another source and someone else recommends that they get like a baby reticulated python, that's where the irresponsible people come in. Like, no, you need to teach people or recommend species that are proper for that family, basically.
Yeah, no, and that's what's great about snakes. It would be so hard. I love monitors and tegus and all that, and maybe one day I would get one, but it's so hard to follow through with that commitment when I think about how easy my snakes are to care for.
Yes, I know what you mean. I have these Cuban false chameleons, and they require so much more work than my snakes do. Really cool animals, but I have to like give them baths a couple times a week. I have to hand feed them all because the dubia roaches will just hide in the sphagnum moss. I have to mist them myself. I have an automatic mister, and I mist them myself. Just so much more work for things with legs.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. So that's a great story. I'm really thankful that you came on and to share it with us. I'm excited for your new project. I hope that the dream starts to come true. And I think hopefully, I'm sure YouTube is kind of helping that in a way.
Yeah, it should definitely help fund the facility and pay for all the construction needed to get those exhibits set up.
Yeah, because that's not going to be an easy job. But that is like in my opinion, the perfect idea of, where the hobby should go. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to chat with you, because your videos are very informative, but they're also giving the right information. And clearly the community is responding very positively to it.
That's what we're hoping for. It's tough when we first did the controversial subject videos. We were like, how is the public going to react to these? But I think since we kind of had a neutral stance on it and explained pros and cons for each side, people took it quite well. We were really surprised.
Yeah, and that definitely helps the newcomers, right? Because those are the questions that they have, and they're like, well, I don't know, should I have a tub or should I have an enclosure? What's the difference? And boom, it's helpful. So it's cool.
Yeah, and there's so many people out there who we call right wayers, where their way is the only way, but there's multiple acceptable ways to take care of these animals in captivity. So you really have to attack it with an open mind. Mm-hmm. And if someone doing something that's working, the animal is healthy and happy, then that's great, even if it's different than how you take care of your own animal. So we try to encourage that too a lot on the channel. Yeah,
the right wayers, they all live on Facebook, and exactly, yeah, there's some creativity that you can have with your animal, because everybody is a little bit different. And like I in particular keep my animals a lot cooler than a lot of people keep their animals, just because it works for me. It's less fluctuation for them, because we obviously live in a cold climate, and it would be more stressful to have heat bouncing up and down. And some people will get super mad about that because they live in South Florida and they have no problem with temperatures.
Right, as long as it's working for you, yeah, it's. Like I said, there's many ways to do it. So there's people get so defensive about it. Like, oh, you use a tub, why don't you use a tank, and vice versa. We just need to get along.
Yeah, exactly. And the animal does need to come first. So I do think that's what you are up to with your, your business and snake discovery. So can you tell people where to, everybody listening knows who you are, but do you mind plugging your website as well as your YouTube channel?
Yeah, our website is mostly for the programs that I do. It's just snakediscovery.com. That's also the Facebook page. And I'm not as active on Facebook as I would like to, because I'm so busy with the YouTube channel, which is just called Snake Discovery. But we do upload every Tuesday and Friday some various reptile or amphibian related video, and it's all about education. Are you on Instagram at all? Yes, actually, my volunteer who helps me out at programs sometimes is in charge of the Instagram account, so she takes care of that. We don't post again as often as I would like, but it's just because we're so busy, but we are on there. Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you very much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Hey, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure. And that is the end of the show. Thank you so much for listening. I do hope you enjoyed that episode. Even listening back to the episode myself as I was editing it, I was really enjoying and engaged as a listener as well. I thought the stories that Emily told were awesome, and I'm really excited for the future project they have, and I hope that their YouTube channel just keeps growing and growing and growing so they can accomplish that, because I think that would be a super positive thing for the hobby. And obviously Emily and her husband are very positive for the hobby, and that's why the hobby is responding so positively in such a great scale to the work that they produce. So if for some reason you are not following Emily and Snake Discovery, make sure you go do that. I'm sure you already are, but if you're not, go do that. They are very, very good role models for the hobby, as well as the new people coming into the reptile industry. So Emily, if you're listening, thank you so much for taking the time. I do really appreciate it. I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as well. I think that is a great way for me to end the 2018 season. This is my last show before the new year and before Christmas and whatnot. So I really, really appreciate everyone that's listened. Building this podcast was sort of a dream, and it took a lot of work, and there's a giant learning curve, and I'm still learning. I'm still very, very green at this. So if you are somebody that has listened to a lot of the episodes, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I hope that you have a great holiday season, and we'll talk to you guys in the new year. Hey, if you want to support the show, make sure you go to animalsathome.ca/podcast. You can buy an Animals at Home t-shirt. $5 for every shirt is donated to the Amazon Rainforest Conservancy. You can donate $2 or $3 to produce the podcast on a link called Buy Me a Coffee, or subscribe on iTunes and YouTube. That helps me tremendously.
And if you have any ideas for guests that you'd like for me to have on the show, it doesn't have to be reptile related. It can just be animal related in some way. Make sure you email me at podcast@animalsathome.ca and let me know what you got. Talk to you later.